right, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. We are so excited to be here, the big day, finally. So welcome to the Fall 2012 Professional Development and Activities Day and another new academic school year. My name is Mary Sandberg, and I'm your new Staff Development Coordinator. All right, well, I wasn't expecting that. Thank you very much. I'm going to kick off this morning with some information on the format of the day before I turn it over to people with much more interesting things to say. But first, I'd like to welcome our colleagues who normally work at other sites, those for whom this is their first PDA day, and our new colleagues who have joined us this year. We have over 60 new staff of faculty, management, and classified colleagues who have joined us over the year, and we will have an opportunity to meet them at the lunch. This is an exciting opportunity for us to come together as one community, to meet, collaborate, and celebrate in person. And finally, a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Dr. Robert Johnstone, for adding his We're very appreciative for his coming to add his experiences and expertise to our program today. So this is truly a unique and special day. Because we have many more people than usual and some who may not be familiar with this campus, we have asked the assistance of some of our student ambassadors. And they are the young people that have been handing out the tickets to you at the front of the room. We really appreciate their help. They'll be here to help provide directions and answer questions. So be sure to say hi. And I thank them for getting up early on a Friday before school starts. I think that was huge. As you entered today, you should have received a small ticket like this from an ambassador. This is your assigned 11 o'clock breakout session. This is the only event that you are assigned to. So please go to the room that's marked on your ticket. If you didn't get a ticket, please see an ambassador at the break and we'll get you one. So we're going to take these breaks at 11 o'clock, and then it's your turn, using what you hear this morning and your own experiences to become a part of the discussions that will help shape our future. From the breakout sessions, we'll come back together for lunch under the oaks. There will be music, introductions of our new staff, and you'll have the opportunity, if you wish, to purchase a sandwich and pizza buffet lunch for $5. We tried to keep it as affordable as we could. Cash is the only thing we can take, unfortunately, and if you have exact change, that would really be appreciated. At 1 o'clock, district offices reopen, and some of you may need to return to work, but for those who are able, you may choose the workshops you'd like to attend. If it has the same title for session 1 as session 2, it's the same workshop, not a continuation. So you pick a different workshop. So that, in a nutshell, is a little review of the day. As you can imagine, an event of this scope takes many, many hands. I will say that every person that I worked with has been supportive, gracious, and flexible, and I really thank you all for that. I'd like to thank the staff development team that I recently joined. They've been very welcoming and supportive. I'd like to give a special thank you to my predecessor, Michelle Poggi. She was always very generous with her time and expertise when I called on her. I'd like to thank Dr. Chong and the administrators who supported closing district offices in recognition of the importance of including everyone in today's dialogue. Absolutely. Now, let's get started, shall we? Please silence your cell phones because it's time to begin the inspiring part. Please welcome my colleague, a faculty member of our computer science department and one of our faculty development coordinators, Dr. Scott Rosen.
Good morning, SRJC. How's everybody doing? You know, I want to get another round of applause for Mary Sandberg. As our new staff development coordinator, she has done a remarkable job so far. She's fantastic. Thank you, Mary. Well, welcome to Seeds of Change. the Santa Rosa Junior College Fall 2012 Professional Development Activities Day. My name is Scott Rosen. I'm the Faculty Development Coordinator for the Petaluma campus. Go Petaluma! Oh, man. I'm just going to savor this moment. This is just really great. Oh, I'm proud of the contribution of the staff development team in cooperation with Dr. Chong and his cabinet to facilitate this unique event. This is truly a special occasion. Today is an unprecedented opportunity for the entire institution and all its constituent groups, classified staff, managers, adjunct and regular faculty, as well as students, to collaborate on creating a shared vision for this institution that could quite possibly provide the inspiration and insight to become first in its class, a world-class institution. At this time, I'm pleased to announce and welcome and acknowledge the SRJC Board of Trustees, some of whom are with us today. Let's get a nice round of applause for Mr. Terry Lindley, Board President. Jeff Cundy, our Vice President. Don Edgar. Rick Call. Onita Pellegrini. Robert Bordeaux. Don Zumwalt. And of course, our student trustee, Michelle Dowling. Thanks for being here this morning. I also wanted to especially thank Javier Rodriguez Aguilera and Carl Dobson for providing this beautiful stage ambiance. Russ Bowden has been a tireless hero managing all of the media and technology used to bring us this event. Want to thank Andy Che with Fresh and Natural. And especially, we want to thank Chris Abrahamson for having our back, providing power and support to staff development so that we can continue to offer a high-quality, meaningful professional development program. Right. Our lunch today is going to be provided, or our lunch music today, yes, is going to be provided by SRJC's own Bennett Friedman from the music department. Spared no expense. Gary Pascaletti from Applied Technology. Dr. Ed Buckley, retired Vice President of Academic Affairs. And yours truly on the bass. I hope we all have an inspiring and productive day today. It's my privilege right now to introduce our classified Senate President. Come on up, Debbie Weatherly. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
I like Mary's note here. It's breathe, relax, smile, slow down. Okay. Good morning. On behalf of the classified staff, I also would like to thank the board, Dr. Chong, and the Professional Development Committee for giving all classified staff an opportunity to attend the morning session of Professional Development Day, which is PDA. This has been a desire of many for a long time, and to see the small seed of suggestion finally come to fruition is very exciting. There may be some in attendance today that are unaware that this is truly a remarkable feat to orchestrate the whole district to be in one place at the same time. Thank you, Mary Sandberg and Chris Abrahamson, for the work you have invested in making this day happen. The Classified Senate would like to acknowledge and thank all the supervisors who have supported and encouraged your staff to be part of the Classified Senate and making a way for those that would like to participate. I know many times this is a sacrifice for you, and we do appreciate your being willing to make those allowances on our behalf. We all work hard as classified employees. Well, most of us. There's an exception, Tom Motherwell. He is my coworker and has spent the week every day reminding me how many days and hours and minutes and seconds I had before I had to give this speech. He even sent me a count-off clock to put on my computer. But I do need to take a moment to recognize a few of our hardest working classified employees that may not be in the limelight too often. Could any of our custodial classified employees from facilities stand for a moment? Are you out there? Come on, don't be shy, stand up. Thank you, thank you, thank you. These folks many times do not get to participate in events because they are working them, setting up and tearing down. They are here before everyone else and here when everyone else has gone home, making sure our offices and rooms are cleaned, and this includes the restrooms. Thank you, and we do appreciate you and your hard work. Yeah. The other classified employees that I'd like to recognize keep our grounds so beautiful. Would you stand for a moment? Are they here? Thank you. These folks also work hard behind the scenes, keeping our walkways free of debris, greeting everyone that is out and about with a smile, and constantly working outside in the heat, wind, and driving rain. We also appreciate you and thank you. When I was a young girl, I would be so excited for the first day of school. The butterflies in the stomach and the anticipation of how great the new year would be. Along with new supplies and books, it was that feeling of a fresh start. We are so fortunate to be employed at a place where every semester is a fresh start for so many people. The idea that people's lives can be given new hope and direction. Students' lives are transformed, and we all have a part that we play in that. Every one of us has the opportunity to encourage the students in this district. It doesn't matter what position we hold. We all have contact with them. We also have the ability to affect their day, which could ultimately change their future. One crossword could be the breaking point of some poor student that is at the end of their rope. Of course, none of us is perfect, and we don't always choose the best way of expressing ourselves. But it is good to be reminded of the ability we have to influence others and the privilege it is to work where we have the possibility of encouraging students to press on. Karen Furukawa, our Vice President of Human Resources, shared at a recent board meeting the district employee demographics. One of the interesting statistics she shared was the average age of all employees, which is 52. I happen to be above average in this statistic. I didn't think anybody would get that. Even more interesting is the statistic for the number that is eligible to retire, which is 54.6. Now, this is a staggering statistic when we could potentially have over half the workforce retire. Karen went on to say that this can lead to many challenges, but also many opportunities. One of these opportunities would be internal advancement. In order to be prepared for possible promotions in the workplace, Classified Senate has set as one of its goals for the 2012-2013 year to work with staff development and human resources in developing a plan for individualized professional development for all classified employees. Yeah. Thank you. Our hope is that this could be utilized as part of the yearly evaluation process, so everyone will be held accountable to it. As Classified Senate President, I am participating on the Task Force for Strategic Planning. I serve on this task force as a representative for all classified employees. I welcome all comments and ideas any classified employee may have. Please feel free to email me or your classified senator with any questions or suggestions that you may have. These are exciting times of change, and we all need to be involved in order to continue to make the future for this district as successful as the past has been. The Senate is also working closely with staff development on a plan for the new classified staff, which obviously we have a lot coming in, during orientation in September. Our desire is to create a mentoring program. We would like to match up seasoned classified employees with the new classified employees in order to encourage and introduce them to our district. If you have an interest in being a mentor for the new classified employees, please let Mary Sandberg or myself know. Thank you, and continuing with our theme of Seeds of Change, may you all be blessed with a bountiful and fruitful year. Now it is my privilege and truly a pleasure to introduce to you Robin Fautley, our new Academic Senate President.
Members of the Board of Trustees, Dr. Chong, classified staff, visiting students, and especially my faculty colleagues, welcome to the 94th academic year at Santa Rosa Junior College. For those of you that do not know me, I'm Robin Fautley, and it is my pleasure to serve as Academic Senate President and represent the faculty in academic matters for the next 2 years. Do you remember your first day of college? Were you lost and unsure, or had you located your classrooms, purchased your books, and a new pencil box the week before classes started? I want to take a moment for you to revisit those feelings. Were you excited and invigorated by hearing an introductory lecture, or were you overwhelmed and fearful? Or was it a combination of the two? Since you are here today, I will guess that you found a sense of magic in your college experience. Now let's think about the students that we will have walking through our classroom doors next week. They are likely to be excited but fearful. They come to us with great expectations, and it is our task to instill in them the sense of magic that we felt. But consider this. Our students have taken many different paths to get here. Some are trying to invent themselves. They are young and reaching for adulthood. Perhaps they know exactly what they need to do because they are already successful students. Perhaps they are unsure of their direction, have not had good school experiences, and have not yet mastered the skills they will need to be successful in college. Some are desperate to reinvent themselves, possibly after a career crumbled and they found themselves back in the job market, needing to develop skills to move forward. Imagine for a moment that you are in their shoes. You didn't expect to have to reinvent yourself. You had a career. How do you feel walking into that classroom? Are you excited? Is it scary? Do you need support? And what about us? Support for education is crumbling around us. Are we willing to work together to support this great institution and keep it a place of excellence for which we can be proud? Are we willing to support each other and make the needed changes? When resources are scarce, do we seek to support each other or take a them versus us approach? Do we make our decisions based on the best interests of our students? There is an ecological principle called competitive exclusion that states that no two species can occupy the exact same niche. As a result of competition, one species will always drive the other out. And while this has been demonstrated to be true experimentally, we know that communities that thrive are rich in diversity, like the tropical rainforest. One way that diversity is maintained is through keystone species. Keystone species can be top-level predators or they can be mutualists. A keystone predator, like the sea star, can stop mussel populations from growing out of control, thereby allowing many more species to thrive in the community. Some fungi are keystone mutualists. They increase the health and diversity of a community by connecting almost all the roots of plants underground in a vast network. They redistribute water and nutrients between plants. They aid seedling establishment, and they keep the entire forest healthier than it would be without the fungi's help. For those of you that aren't familiar with this concept, it may be helpful to recall the movie Avatar and the planet Pandora's neural network. You know, they didn't just make these things up. I am trained as a scientist to use evidence, logic, and analysis to drive decision-making. Scientific disciplines contribute to the food on your table, modern medicine, and can help us protect our precious environment. But my life would not be as rich without the cultural arts, philosophy, history, and all the rest. We all need each other to be strong and maintain excellence. Santa Rosa Junior College is a complex community that needs a mutualistic network of support. We can best weather the severe economic storm we face by working together, respecting each other, and realizing we are better together. We will do best if we face these challenges and see that while some are frightening, others create opportunities. We have the opportunity to redefine ourselves by developing a master plan under our new leadership. Dr. Chong is championing innovative programs to help us reach forward and discover new ways to shape our future and make ourselves stronger. We can be proud of significant achievements this past year. We passed our midterm accreditation report, and you helped to make this possible by reaching 100% SLO completion. Moving forward to our next full accreditation in 2015, we will need to show an ongoing cycle of assessment, a strong link between resource allocation and planning. Shortcomings in these two areas are major reasons that other colleges have been placed on warning or probation. I also want to express appreciation to the board, our administrators, and AFA for working effectively to manage our finances, keeping SRJC from experiencing the significant fiscal problems that other colleges are experiencing. There are many changes that we will need to adapt to. The recommendations of the Student Success Task Force are nipping at our heels. We have to implement a new priority registration model. We are already being affected by changes that limit students to 3 attempts to pass a class. And we must make sure that our students know that this can affect their education retroactively. It is also important that students realize that the date to drop a class without a W and with a W both have moved 1 week earlier in the semester. The Student Success Task Force will push students to make an education plan, finish their basic skill courses early. We have the opportunity to add prerequisites to our class to increase the likelihood of success. This exciting chance to improve student success and retention must be done cautiously to avoid unanticipated consequences. I encourage you to get familiar with the new academic integrity policy and procedure, and thank Phyllis Usina and many others for the dedicated work required to accomplish this. The procedure clearly defines what constitutes academic dishonesty, and this fall we will be tackling a mechanism to discourage repeat offenses in serial classes. Likewise, Susan Wilson guided the complete revision of the students' grievance and complaint policy and procedure, and neither of these would have been so clearly constructed was it not for the expertise of Melissa Court, who added her flair to writing. These are just 2 of the recent great successes that happened under Terry Schell's direction as Senate President. One of his significant accomplishments is an agreement he fostered to recruit 24 new full-time faculty last spring. I hope you will join with me in expressing your appreciation for his leadership on the behalf of the faculty. During the next year, I hope to visit many departments and learn from you about representing your interests. But representing you is not a job that I can do for you alone. We need the capable and dedicated faculty of SRJC to serve their departments or clusters, and we need you to serve on important academic senate committees. Working together as mutualists in a community, we are better than the sum of our parts. Recently, Karen Furukawa, as Debbie already told you, talked about the fact that over 50% of our faculty and staff are at an age where they can retire, and many more of our administrators. As I look at the great work that has been done in the prior year and wonder who might step up to continue the legacy of excellence that has existed for years, I am looking to you for your help and support. Of course, the most important part of our community is our students. Quite simply, we would not be here without them. I'm sure you will agree that the best part of teaching is when you know you've made a difference in a student's life and they are excited about what they are learning. So I want to finish by echoing our new leader, Dr. Chong. We are dream makers. Let's go out and make some dreams come true. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce Nancy Persons, the staff development coordinator and my friend. Nancy, please join us on stage.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you all. Robin, thank you for your inspiring words, and greetings to our board, to Dr. Chong, to friends and colleagues. I also have to give a shout out to all the people from Petaluma I don't get to see as much as I used to. But hi. I am so pleased to stand here before you all as your new Santa Rosa campus faculty development coordinator, and for the opportunity to work with this excellent staff development team. Following our keynote speaker this morning, we will have one common breakout session, Peak Experiences at SRJC. In this session, in smaller groups, you're all asked to participate in a district-wide conversation that will help fuel our strategic planning efforts. Now, as you all know, we all have multiple opportunities for conversations with our friends and immediate colleagues. You had some of those this morning, and you're probably dying to continue them as soon as you leave this room. This day's a little different. You each should have received a ticket, kind of like this one, as you entered this room. If you didn't, you can get one from the student ambassadors on your way out. Now, in the spirit of not doing business as usual, we ask you to honor the intent of today's PDA Day by expanding your horizons a little, and this means making the commitment to going to the room noted on your ticket and engaging in guided conversation with whomever you find there. Might meet some new people. You'll also notice another difference this morning. No rosters, right? Therefore, we ask all faculty members to remember to fill out and sign off on your verification form, and to please send those into staff development as soon as possible. All SRJC employees will find a survey about today's events in their email, probably Monday or Tuesday this coming week. We ask everybody who's participated to take the time to fill out and submit your survey so we can make future activities as meaningful as possible for you. As Robin noted, whether student, administrator, classified staff, or faculty member, we find ourselves in somewhat challenging times. Now and then, each of us may have experiences that are difficult to cope with, and this is perhaps best summed up in the words of some fuzzy puppets I saw this summer, sung so well by SRT actors. It sucks to be me, something like that. Or more gleefully, boy, it sucks to be you. But the Avenue Q cast also reminded us, yeah, but only for now. Robin spoke about mutualism and adaptation. In the moment where we recognize there is a possibility for change and say yes to the effort required, our options for adaptation and evolution emerge, and somehow the struggle doesn't seem as hard. In conversation a while ago with Dr. Chong, he made a comment to me about the challenges we face and the fact that no matter the origins of the situation we find ourselves in now, it's on our watch now. It is up to us to create the best educational experience possible for our students. Today, all of us have an opportunity to begin this process and set strategic planning in motion together. In the words of the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, and now let us welcome the new year, full of things that have never been. With that sentiment in mind, would you please join me in welcoming our new president, Dr. Frank Chong.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Wow. How do I follow those speeches? You guys have set the bar high. Well, welcome back, everybody. I always like to begin by talking about what did you do this summer? And I've spoken to some of the faculty, and some of you have been to Morocco, to all over the place, Bahamas, and Spain seems to be a favorite destination. And some of you have stayed close to California. And my summer consisted mostly of exploring Northern California on a quick camping trip to Mendocino, Eureka, Ashland, and Shasta. And Ricardo Navarrete said, "You go camping, Frank? I thought you were a city guy." But it reminded me of the timelessness of the headlands of Mendocino, the magic of the Lost Coast, and the majesty of the redwood forest with all its ferns. I would find myself visiting community colleges along my route, much the way my dad would take us to Chinese restaurants when we were on vacation. I remember enjoying great meals in Seattle, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, Chinatowns, and he invariably would rate their cuisine against his own restaurant in Wantagh, Long Island. So here I am stopping by the College of the Redwoods, College of the Siskiyous, Mendocino College, and comparing them to our JC, like father, like son. By the way, no comparison. I also enjoyed my first summer exploring our very own Sonoma County. Best chowder in Bodega Harbor at the Spud Point Marina. A Michelin-rated find also in Bodega called Terrapin Creek. Ventured to Cloverdale for a great burger at Pick's Drive-In. Almost as good as the burger in Rockefeller Oyster in Valley Ford. As you can see, I ate my way through the county. I did take in 2 great productions at SRT, Xanadu and Sweet Charity, and was blown away by the energy and the talent. I attended my first Sonoma County Fair and watched Terry Lindley's daughter, Lily, ride a mutton. Quite an experience. She's a real trooper. And one of the great times was being at the Rootstock Festival with our new dean, Gannison Shudamsan, at the Wineyard, featuring Schoen Farm wines and our double gold medal olive oil. I took in 2 great concerts at the Wells Fargo, Earth, Wind & Fire and Seal. 41 years, Earth, Wind & Fire, and they still rock. What a great venue and a great show. I ran into Karen Furukawa and her husband Larry at EWF, and they sat in the front center right here. And I was sat in the last row in the balcony. What's up with that? And I'll say to the students, I refuse to be with the 1%ers. I sat, but that's the best seat in the house for those who know. Rest assured that I'm thoroughly enjoying Sonoma County, and please keep the referrals coming. Believe me, I'm eating as fast as I can. I also went back to Washington, D.C. to pick up my 15-year-old daughter, Mia, from a 6-week intensive training at the Kirov Academy of Ballet. Besides being a proud dad at her recital, I snuck in visits with several friends and colleagues at the Department of Education. I truly miss the people, but hardly miss donning a suit and tie in the sticky D.C. heat. I really look forward to hearing about your summer adventures. Some have ventured again to Turkey, Mexico, Hawaii, and Spain seems to be the hot spot this summer. So as we approach beginning the new semester, I cannot help but be excited by the fall semester, my first full fall semester at the JC. My remarks today will share with you what I've seen so far, share with you where we need to go as an institution and what we've done so far, and where I believe we need to go to maintain our tradition of excellence. The last 8 months has been a whirlwind for me. I liken it to drinking water out of a fire hose. I could not ask for a warmer welcome. Everyone I've come across at campus and in the community have extended their support to ensure that I'm successful. I need to first recognize Dr. Grella, an extraordinary leader who handed the baton over to me. I would like to quote from Jim Miller's book, Good to Great. Level 5 leaders, and this is the highest level, channel their egos' needs away from themselves and into the larger goal of building a great organization. Indeed, they are incredibly ambitious, but their ambition is first and foremost for the institution, not to themselves. Dr. Grella is a level 5 leader, and SRJC was fortunate to have him as a president. Let's give him a round of applause. I spoke to him a couple days ago, and he said, oh yeah, PDA is coming up, huh, Frank? And he wished me well, and he said he'd be viewing it afterwards online. And I told him I hope he wouldn't give me a Yelp review, because I heard he's a tough grader. I also want to thank my Board of Trustees for their faith and confidence in me and being accessible and providing me with entree into the tight-knit Sonoma County family. The board has been getting to know me and my style, and I'm getting acquainted with them as well. We have been engaging in adult conversations about the college. For anyone who perceives them as not being involved or engaged, I can assure you they are very much engaged, committed, accessible, and supportive of me and the JC. Thank you, board. And by the way, the filing deadline just ended, and the 3 trustees who are on the ballot are running unopposed. And I think that speaks to the level of confidence the community has in them. But it also saves the junior college, according to Doug Roberts, $200,000 of our funds that we would have to put into the election. So that's money that's going back to the education of our students. The faculty, management team, classified leaders, and student leaders have all welcomed me with tremendous support. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, what have I seen so far? What I see is a college with a tradition of excellence, a tradition that's steeped in 94 years of service to Sonoma County, a college that has transformed generations of Sonoma County and North Bay residents, a college that can rightfully claim to being one of the most gorgeous and pristine campuses in the country, a campus that Willie Brown says he mistook for Stanford upon arriving here to speak. And not just this campus, but the Petaluma campus, Schoen Farm, Public Safety Center, the Southwest Center. What I find is a college dedicated and elite faculty when it comes to transforming the lives of its students. And I'd like to quote, mediocre faculty tell, good faculty explain, excellent faculty demonstrate, great faculty inspire. In my time here, I cannot tell you how many residents shared with me that, just amongst a sample, Professor Jack Wegman changed my life. Eric Thompson changed my life. Susan Wilson changed my life. Michael Salinger changed my life. Marty Lee changed my life. Luz Navarrete changed my life. Brenda Fleiselhawk changed my life. Ben Nguyen changed my life. Just a sample. And they would say, I would not be a doctor, dentist, nurse, lawyer, restaurateur, winery owner, police captain, had it not been possible for these faculty members to have an impact on me. Our faculty inspire. They are, you are great. Give yourselves a hand. And what do I see? I see a college that is rich in student life, a college that has an active student club and AS government, sometimes too active. Great athletic teams. I've had a chance to play golf with the golf coach and the baseball coach, and they're really good sports, but they still won't let me beat them. We have a great student newspaper, the Oak Leaf, award-winning. We have a great theater department that has a whole great array and menu of productions this year, and I plan to attend as many as I can. We have an award-winning speech and debate team and speech coaches that give me coaching on the side for free, so I really appreciate them. And a wonderful music department, great student life. What do I see? I see a loyal, hardworking, classified staff. They're often the least appreciated and most overlooked part of our college family. I marvel at how they go quietly about doing their business, keeping our grounds pristine, staffing our labs and library and student services, making sure that our students get the materials they need in their libraries. They also ensure that we get hired, our benefits get processed, and we get our paychecks on time. No small task. And that is why I'm so pleased that Debbie Weatherly came to me shortly after I arrived and recommended we want in. The proposal was to include all classified staff in PDA Day. I consulted with my VPs, and they were all supportive. The downside is some students are going to be turned away this morning, but the upside is that we want to benefit from their ideas, their participation, and their brain power. We need to change up. Thank you to all the classified staff for supporting our faculty, administrators, and students. Let's give them a hand. What do I see? A college that is steeped in traditions such as the upcoming Harvey Hansen Memorial Barbecue on Friday, September 7th at Schoen Farm. Please come. I've never participated. I'm looking forward to it. I think the theme is Out of Africa this year, and I'm really looking forward to it, so please join me. The Circle of Honor Scholarship Ceremony that we just held at Day Under the Oaks. It was a wonderful opportunity to see community leaders encircling students and showing the web of support to ensure that the students will have the same opportunities that these generous benefactors had with the JC. Our Classified Recognition Day, week, Day Under the Oaks, which I'll talk about a little later. Our State of the College and President's Medallion. What do I see? The Doyle Scholarship. Since 1950, SRJC's received from the Doyle and distributed to over 114,000 students, $76 million in Doyle scholarships. And next week, the Exchange Bank will be meeting, and I think you're going to be hearing some good news. If I told you any more, I'd have to kill you. And our shared governance system, as complex it is, it really encourages and it relies on faculty, classified, and student participation to make sound decisions that I could recommend to the board for policy. And I'll talk about that more later. So what's the problem? We have a great campus, great faculty, great staff. The world is changing. You all know that. With the economic downturn in 2008, according to Doug Roberts, over the past 3 years, state funding for community colleges has permanently been cut 12%. To counter these losses, the district implemented re-engineering and worked successfully with AFA, SEIU, and the management team on concessions to mitigate the impact. Unfortunately, the magnitude and nature of the state cuts did force the district to reduce course offerings. This year, the district, along with the rest of the community college system, is facing a dilemma. Should the governor's tax initiative, Proposition 30, not pass in November, community colleges would permanently be cut another 7.5% to 8%. So if you do the math, that's 20% in the last 4 years, and who knows what holds in the future. So we've taken steps, but we structurally have expenditures that exceed revenues, and you don't have to be an accountant to know that's not a good thing. So in order for the district to remain viable over the long term, Santa Rosa Junior College needs to either reduce expenditures even further or more preferably increase revenues. Of the latter, the district's already taken very concrete steps towards greater revenue diversity. To name just a few avenues we're looking at, we've already taken steps to look at increasing the number of international students that come here. Not just for the money, but because we need to prepare our students to be in a global world. And not all of our students have the ability to travel abroad. So let's bring those students from abroad and integrate them with our student body. And I think great things and magical things will happen. Thank you. As you know, we've also explored the possibility of a parcel tax, the viability which is tied to the November elections. And I think we're going to have more conversations about revenues, and the parcel tax was reported in the Press Democrat as this and that. But again, it was, an adult conversation that I have with my board and with the college community. And it's not something that we do lightly in any community, but it's something that, as a college community, we need to have serious conversations about. Thank you. I'm lukewarm to taxes too, so I don't mind with that applause. We're actually pursuing grant funding, such as Gateway to College, with that's funded by the Gates Foundation. I'm pleased to announce we're one of the finalists and funded. It would allow students who have dropped out of schools in Petaluma to come back and have a second bite of the apple, as I like to say. And I really want to thank Jane Saldana-Talley and Casey Graney for their leadership in this grant. We received a migrant education grant, the high school equivalency program that's going to allow migrant workers to come back and get their GEDs. And that has been successfully funded by the Department of Education for over $2 million for the next 5 years. And I want to thank Catherine Wilson and Marty Lee and their team for putting that together. We're also establishing ourselves as a Hispanic serving institution. That means the 25% threshold of our students are Latino, and that will make us eligible for a plethora of different types of federal funds that will help support not only Latino students, but all students at this college. I want to thank Ricardo Navarrete for leading that effort and his team. We're working with the Hanover Group, which is a consulting firm in Washington, to help identify and secure additional funding. Many of the faculty will be engaging with them this year to identify how they can be helpful in providing support for you in your disciplines if you are choosing to become more entrepreneurial and look for grants so that you can better serve your students. So similarly to what we did 2 years ago, and it needs to be stated, many of the recommendations that you came up with in terms of reducing costs and adding revenue, we're going to relook at again in the Budget Advisory Committee. Many of the areas that we've worked on in terms of diversification of funds came out of an exercise that preceded me. So what I'm saying to you is, these are not Frank Chong ideas. These are your ideas that I'm reflecting back to you, and my job is to help implement them. So working together, the district through the last few difficult years, and by working, we're going to continually be fiscally sound. We're going to continue to provide educational services to our students. So let's talk a little bit more about what we've done so far. I like to call it expanding the pie. Our foundation is really pivoting and really being responsive. We received a $5 million anonymous donation this year, the single largest donation of a living individual in the history of California community colleges. This will allow us to create the Santa Rosa Junior College Teaching Fellows Program. This program will be established to provide, I think, what I call a win-win. It'll provide students who have an interest in going into the field of education to dip their toes in the water and be TAs for you in your classrooms, for you to mentor them. And I know many of you had students in the past who you said, that person can be a great teacher. But I think we need to be more intentional. In the next 10 years, we're going to need 1 million new teachers in the United States. And I'm sure if you looked at the demographics, we have to start growing our own. And I think the Santa Rosa Junior Teachers Program will allow us to take a real first step in encouraging and inspiring many of our students to go into this very profession that has made Santa Rosa Junior College what it is today. We've also created a completion incentive award for those students who have a difficulty getting to the finish line and getting their degree or their certificate. We've created a fund that will allow students to look at how do we, if they have a medical bill or their car breaks down or they run out of financial aid because of the new Pell requirements. Chris Scheer is working with her staff to make sure that our students get across the finish line. The foundation has agreed also at its last retreat to do 2 things that I think are significant. One is to establish a faculty innovations fund, which will fund faculty innovation ideas about things that you might have thought, well, I wish if I had a few dollars, a couple thousand here, I could increase the retention and the success of our students. Well, now you will get to have that chance thanks to the foundation. Secondly, we're going to restore Day Under the Oaks. And it's something that when I first was interviewing for the job, Lori Beard, who I think many of you know her, came up to me afterwards and said, Dr. Chong, you need to restore Day Under the Oaks, you know? And, you know Lori, you got to listen. But then other people came up to me and said, you know, we really need to have Day Under the Oaks. It was kind of the open house. It was established by the late Larry Bertolini. And when Mr. Bertolini passed, his family wanted to do something for the college, and we got together and talked about what can we do. And we thought restoring Day Under the Oaks would be something that Larry would have liked. And his family was generous to provide support in the foundation too, as well. So I really encourage you to work with Robert Ethington this year to help us bring back Day Under the Oaks bigger and better than ever before, because it's our connective tissue to the community. It's the one day that we have this large open house for our community. I've never been to one, so I really look forward to it. I think I want to thank the foundation. I want to thank Don Shigazola, who's in the audience today, the president of the foundation, and the foundation for their leadership. Thank you so much. So I'm going to step away from the prepared speech and do a little Steve Jobs number, hopefully with a better outcome, and talk a little bit about the vision, you know, and people have been asking me, well, what's the vision? What's the vision? You know, and what's the strategic plan vision? And I could tell you, as I met with my vice president, I could say that the vision is that we want to be the best community college in the country. We want to prepare our students for a global economy to be competitive in the workforce. We want to prepare our students to really help revitalize the economy of Sonoma County, of the state, and of the country. That we want to really be able to be prepared to work with the growing diversity in our community and really lead, not follow. That we really want to have a college that's going to be using technology as our students are enabling it, so that our faculty can use it as a tool not to replace, but to enhance your ability to have student success and retention. I said, but those are Frank Chong's ideas, you know, and I think what this college needs is really a bottom-up and a top-down approach to strategic planning. And I've had the pleasure of working with Schoen Farm President Max Schwing, who's a former Deloitte consultant. And for those of you who don't know Deloitte, they're one of the largest consulting firms in the country and the world. And they typically will provide consulting services to Fortune 500 companies, higher education institutions, and they charge a lot of money. So I approached Mac and I said, Mac, would you let me pick your brain about strategic planning, because I want to make sure we do it right at the college. And he suggested that we get together with a woman named Sandy Shirai, who Mac mentored at Deloitte. I looked her up on the Google, and she's just not a consultant. She headed up the whole U.S. operation for consulting for Deloitte. And we had dinner about a month ago down in San Francisco, and she said, what can I do to help you, Frank? And I said, well, I have a college here. We want to do strategic planning right, and this is what I'm thinking. I don't really want to hire a consultant, have them come in here and do interviews and put together a pretty package, and that document sits on a shelf. And she said, you're doing it right. And she goes, what can I do to help? And I said, it would be helpful if you would be willing to share some of your experience with us, but I don't have the dollars to pay for it. And her response was, well, Mac helped me get to where I am. If you're a friend of Mac's, you're a friend of mine. And that's the type of attitude that we have. So I want to thank Mac Schwing. Thank you, Mac, for putting that together. So in the next couple of days, I'm going to send you some materials that Deloitte has put together for the college. And it's not, again, top down. It's not, this is how you do it. This is how they do it. And it's going to be two documents. One that's going to be a framework for how to do strategic planning. And secondly, it's a real nice article about the top 10 challenges that institutions of higher ed provide. So I think that's what really my vision is for strategic planning, is I want to create a learning community, as you have in your classroom. I want to create a learning community of 3,000, okay? That it's going to include faculty, students, classified, the external community, the board, and make it something that you all have your thumbprint on. And I think if you all have ownership in it, then I'm confident that we can get to where we need to go. You know, there's a lot of good things about this place. And when we talk about seeds of change, I don't want the faculty who've been here for many, many years to think that and sound like I'm being critical, because I'm not. I'm really proud and of what this place is about. I wouldn't have come here if I didn't think I could take it to another level. And with all of your brain power in this room and all of your energy and all your commitment, I'm confident we can. So I'll just close with a quote by a French poet named Guillaume Apolloniou, and it goes like this. Come to the edge, he said. They said, we are afraid. Come to the edge, he said. They came, he pushed them, and they flew. Thank you. Before I introduce Rob Johnstone, our keynote speaker, I wanted to show Rob pictorially a day in the life of Santa Rosa Junior College, and I want to thank Russ Bowden and his staff. We debuted this at the State of the College, and I wanted to share it with you today at PDA Day. So, Russ, you're on. Wasn't that special? Let's give Rob and his staff, they do great work. And thanks to all of you for adding the content. So part of the game plan this year is we need to get more external, in my opinion, what I call the Sonoma bubble. We live in this wonderful bubble, but because of our proximity, we're not close to San Francisco or Washington, and thank God, but we need to learn from the brain power that's happening around the state, around the nation, and my plan is to, instead of traveling and having $2,000 travel expense to go to a hotel and fly somewhere, I think I'm going to invest that $2,000 one time here, bring them to Sonoma County, and have all of you listen to them. So. And you know what? When I invite people from Washington, New York, and other places, I said, would you come to Sonoma County? They said, yeah. It's not a hard sell. And if I can get them to visit with Mac and have some wine at the wine yard and go bring them up to Schoen Farm, it's going to be really fun. So having said that, Rob Johnstone is an extraordinary community college leader. I've heard about him for many years. He's with Skyline College. He is a senior research fellow with the Research Planning Group. And he is really about students and about faculty. He is somebody who has been in a leadership position nationally. Two projects that I worked with when I was in Washington, D.C. was the establishment of the Aspen Institute for Community College Excellence, which is a kind of Malcolm Baldrige type of prize that the president wanted to establish to really raise and elevate community colleges to its rightful place. And Rob has been working with that group and actually visiting the best practices of community colleges throughout the country. And this is the second year it's in place. And I told Rob that next year I expect us to be in the competition, so watch out for everybody else. And he's also been involved with another initiative I work with called Completion by Design. And this is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is a national initiative to try to how do we get our students to the finish line? And I think he's going to share with you some interesting observations. And this is wonderful, again, to establish our learning community of 3,000. This is the opening, and I couldn't think of a more appropriate person to bring on. And I really thank Rob for dressing up for today, because he's a good man. So let's give him let's please give Rob Johnstone of Sonoma County welcome. You're on, buddy.
All right. So thank you, President Chong. And I have to say that a couple of years ago, started traveling around the country to do a lot of these keynotes and work on these projects. And I once showed up to a meeting that I thought was a semi-formal meeting in a Hawaiian shirt, which is what is kind of my California casual look. And I showed up to this meeting, and everyone else was in a suit, and I was in my Hawaiian shirt. And I remember very specifically that Tom Bailey from CCRC, the Community College Research Center, came up to me and said, I love that you had the courage to do this. You should keep doing this. And so I did it a couple of times, and I went to another meeting in New York where I decided I'd actually put on the coat and tie, which I don't do very often. And I showed up, and someone from the Gates Foundation looked at me and said, where's the Hawaiian shirt? We don't want you here if you're not in a Hawaiian shirt. And so now it's become this shtick, and so I keep Tommy Bahama in business. But the other thing about this is that I wish I was smart enough to actually have planned this, because I now get to go to meetings where everyone else is wearing a coat and tie, and I'm in an untucked Hawaiian shirt. This brilliance was certainly not by plan. I also want to share with you to start off, I do this thing I call the Presentation Challenge Index. It's patent pending. And I rate each presentation that I'm doing in terms of its challenge. And I look at things like size of the room. We've got a pretty big room here, acoustics, which are fairly good here, whether I've done the presentation before, the type of people in the room, and I know some of the people in the room, like Mary Kay and Casey and Dr. Chong. But I also, when I'm doing this index, think of the other situations I've been in that are higher or lower challenge. Certainly when you're giving a presentation you've done 10 times, now that's fairly low index. But the setting is one of the most important parts of this. So some of the worst settings to present in is the dreaded lunch hour presentation, which is when a group of 500 people finally gets out of their morning of boring presentations. They get a chance to talk to each other, and 20 minutes into their lunch, someone stops them and says, all right, now you got to listen to this guy. It's a fairly high challenge. That is exceeded, however, by the happy hour presentation, which I swear to God to you, I've done a happy hour presentation. And those of you who know me, Mary Kay could tell some stories, I'm sure, know that I would much rather be on the other side of this. And anyone ever did that to me when I was at happy hour, I would be incredibly annoyed. So that was a tough one. My other one recently that was interesting was I presented at 8 a.m. on the last day of a conference in New Orleans. So that, I was happy I had 20 people in a 30-person room. That was pretty good. Earlier this year, I presented at Dallas Community College District, which is a very large district in Texas in relation to completion by design. And it was in a gymnasium with 1,200 people in the room, which is very, very large rooms. They're pretty challenging. Acoustics were pretty bad. The other two things that made that challenging was before I started presenting, I was informed that President Obama had spoken there 2 days before. So I was going to be compared to that. And to make it worse, they had their student choir group kick off the morning with 2 musical numbers from Rent and Wicked. So they fire up the crowd with this wonderful music, and they say, here's Rob talking about data. So that was a challenge. So those are all challenge index issues. The biggest one, though, I have to admit, was not me. And some of you, I don't know if any of you were at this meeting. It was about 8 years ago in Orange County. I don't remember what group it was, but it was a lunch presentation, so already a trouble. And the speaker was, hopefully is not in the room because I don't remember who it was, wasn't the most fascinating of speakers. But this is at one of these Orange County hotels where there's a pool outside the conference room, right, which is already somewhat distracting. And the way they had set this room up is you had the platform, and the pool was like right there, right? And I kid you not, I wish I could make this up, but I'm not making it up. Going on at the pool during lunch, so I already have the other problem, is the Miss Fitness California swimsuit presentation. I kid you not. And so we're all sitting there in the and this poor guy is sitting there, and this is literally, and I don't even think he knew, because they came out as he was talking. So he probably thought, this is the most rapt attention I've ever gotten in my entire life. But so this, by those standards, this is like a 5. This is good group of people. So thanks for the introduction. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, just because I come from the system. So I have a doctorate in social psychology from the University of Oregon. My doctoral research, starting off a career of humor, was done on jury decision-making, right? And it was done on jury decision-making in 1994 to 1996. Anyone remember what was going on in that world of criminal justice during that time? The OJ trial. I literally was trying to do jury decision-making research during the OJ trial. So none of my results are remotely applicable to anything. I went off into industry and did strategic consulting for about 6 years, cleaning up after Deloitte and Touche projects. I'm kidding. We're just kidding about that. I'm kidding. We only did that 3 times. But then I came to higher education. I finally escaped a series of, the other brilliant move I had made is I went to an internet consulting strategy firm in the summer of 2000. Good timing there. This internet thing isn't going to take, I said, for a long time. Then I finally jumped, and 2 weeks later, our stock, I got in there, and my stock was at 14. They gave me a bunch of stock options at 14. And you know, between the 4 weeks that I got the offer and when I got there, it was down to 10. And so they said they'd move the options on 10. This is awesome. I've got all these options at 10. 6 weeks later, it was at 1. And a year later, the company didn't exist. So that was a good time. So I landed in the community college system at Foothill College down the road as actually just to completely move in another direction as a college researcher. Someone like Casey is an institutional researcher at Foothill. And I had a wonderful experience there over 3 years. And because I had done some teaching and served in senior positions in industry, I ended up in Mary Kay's position at Foothill. And she still teases me about how anyone would actually hire me to do VP of instruction. But I was VP of instruction at Foothill for 3 years. And then moved to Skyline to be Dean of Research and Planning after much therapy getting over being a VP of instruction, which is a hard thing to do. Having to see people like Mary Kay all the time, I'm telling you, good times. No, that made it good. She asked me to say something. She said that they wanted to let her, she wanted to let her to introduce me, and they wouldn't let her, and I thank you guys for that decision. I thank you immensely for that. But in all of those 10 years, I've worked with the RP group, and oh, where's the clicker? And so a little bit about, hey, there we go. Who's the RP group? So the history of the RP group is kind of an interesting one. Historically, really was a professional association for the institutional researchers in the state. It's been around for about 20 years. And for the first 10 of those years, really into the early 2000s, it really served much as the CIO group, the CSSO group, or the Senate did as a professional organization for the researchers. We'd get together, we'd have SPSS trainings, it would be a good time had by all. And in the early 2000s, some visionary leaders like Dr. Bob Gabriner and Ken Meehan started, and KC, by the way, was involved in this too, started moving the organization to doing research and evaluation work around California. One of the things that happens to us in the community college world is when we get research and evaluation services from external people, they often don't understand the world of community colleges. And so we started doing some of that research and evaluation work from the inside, people who are practitioners in the colleges. And then a couple of years ago, we started doing work in technical assistance and more what I would call classic strategic consulting, helping colleges redesign some of their programs and structures. And again, not done from an external standpoint, but from an internal. I think the piece of this that is really critical is that we are community college practitioners, not just researchers, by the way. We have administrators and student services professionals and faculty who work on our projects. We have now, as we've moved nationally in the last year, eight-ish full-time staff and a network of 75 part-time consultants, including KC, who work with us on a variety of projects. I think we have 30 active projects right now. And about a year ago, we started doing this work nationally. And Dr. Chong mentioned that we started working on a couple of these big national projects. One of our key shticks that I'm going to come back to a lot this afternoon in my breakouts, but I'm going to weave through here as well, is one of our key assertions is in the last 10 years, we've done a great job in the community college system at bringing data into the game, right? Bringing evidence and data. This mythical culture of evidence has been something we've been working on. I think it's largely been a good thing. But where I, as a social psychologist and someone who used to do the same stuff in industry, have been saying for about 10 years too, having the data doesn't really do you anything, right? You actually need to actually explore and use the data to actually inform decisions. This doesn't mean that every decision is made by the data. In fact, quite often, this notion that data drives decision-making is actually quite false. It provides a foundation for inquiry around the data. And so our shtick is that you need to explore data. You need to actually think about it. And by the way, another thread that I'll weave through, leverage the deep subject matter expertise of every one of you in this room. Cross-functionally, you know, I could show, and I'll show later if I have time, and I'll definitely do it this afternoon. I'll show some data that is fairly interesting about student success. And I guarantee you, in this room of 500-ish people, there are going to be about 150 to 500 different interpretations of why a given result has happened and what we might do about it. And the problem with what we do mostly with data is we stop there. We don't ask people for those opinions. We don't try to get a collective understanding of what might be going into producing a result or then translating any of that into action. So I'll come back to that a little bit as we move forward. So just some acknowledgments about this particular presentation. I'm largely going to be relying on the work we've done in Completion by Design. So, and I'll tell you a little bit about that project in a minute. But much of the content was developed in tandem with folks like, we're really close partners with the Community College Research Center and CCRC, folks like the Completion Design Assistance Team, Public Agenda, WestEd, and also informed by our work on the Aspen Prize. So kind of the outcomes for this session in the hour, and by the way, I've done this in an 8-hour version. You can really cover a lot in 8 hours. It's kind of hard in 1 hour. So we'll see what we can get to. But we're going to talk about introducing a pathways approach. And what Completion by Design is about, and we'll talk about it again in a minute, is really the notion that we need to think a little more coherently about student pathways and progress through our institution rather than a series of vertical silos and offering things like classes and programs. So we'll come back to that. The notion of using the lost momentum framework to start conversations. And I'm going to end each of these sections, by the way, with a series of discussion questions. Normally, I would stop and have this discussion. As those of you who've seen me present before in groups that are smaller than this, I have it be a two-way dialogue the whole time. That's kind of hard in a Keynote to do with this size room. So we can take some of that discussion that would come out of this into the afternoon sessions. But the other reason I leave you these discussion questions is you can take these into other campus meetings and start thinking about some of these issues if it takes with you guys. So we're going to explore the use of completion data in a simple set of analysis from CCRC. I love the way that Davis Jenkins and the team at CCRC has thought about the nature of completion and success. And we'll talk a little bit about completion in a second. And then I want to make sure we get to the design principles that we're using in CBD, which really 8 design principles which kind of guide the notion of, you guys talked about change, you've talked about redesign, what can we do differently, by the way, with less resources, not even equal resources. What can we do differently in terms of managing our student experience? We're going to talk about some of the design principles. And then if I have time, I'll give a little teaser on this stuff we're going to talk about this afternoon. So let's first start off with a little backdrop to the student experience. Some of you may have seen this slide before, but I use this slide for 2 purposes. One, in the afternoon, is to make the point that too often what we do in our world with data is we look at things like transfer rate. Right? You think about the common metrics we measure ourselves by, and in a second I'm going to talk about how transfer rate only applies to one group of our students. Right? We have a lot of different segments of students. Transfer applies to one of them. We'll come back to that in a minute. But for a second, let's even just talk about that group of students. And we tend to do in our accountability measures, whether it's ARC or internal accountability measures, the type of things ACCJC is looking for, even the type of things that are looked for by the press and the public, things like transfer rate are the things we usually focus on. Right? And we could have a nice hour-long discussion about who should be in the denominator of a transfer rate. Right? Is it anyone who shows up on campus for a fall semester has never been there before, or do you need some kind of behavior or intent mechanism to find out if they really are actually trying to transfer? For a second, we're going to shelve this, by the way, is the heart of the debate between the Chancellor's Office definition of transfer rate and Nancy Shulock's definition of transfer rate. Right? Which, by the way, not to say one is right or wrong, but one of them takes anyone who's ever stepped foot on a community college campus and haven't been there before in the denominator. The Chancellor's Office, partially in response to that extreme of a measure, has a measure that looks at anyone who's ever taken, is it 12 or more units or 9 or more units? 12 or more units and has tried transfer math or English, right? Which clearly limits a large number of students. By the way, the 2 transfer rates you get if you do that system-wide are about 21%. And somewhere in the 60% range. Right? So part of the point of that is that methodology matters quite a lot in how we think about this. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that we know our college transfer rate is 40%. And in an opening day session like this, a very well-intentioned and visionary leader says, I want to make that 40%, I want this college to make that 40% 50% in 5 years. Right? This is the type of thing we hear all the time. And then all of you, I used to teach part-time in psychology, or I was the institutional researcher. Each of you is sitting out in the audience going, yeah, that's a good idea. Then you go back to your offices at the end of the day, or at some point in the day. You sit down, and if you're still thinking about it, which hopefully you would be, you say, what the hell am I going to do about that? Right? I don't have a direct influence on something that's a transfer rate, because transfer rate exists where? At a 30,000-foot level. So we're going to talk about this particular piece this afternoon, that one of the things we need to do as we look at data is unpack these large longitudinal metrics down to things we can control. Things that you might control, whether you're a social science faculty or CTE faculty, a student services professional, a dean, or even an administrative staff. Things that you have control over that do make a difference. So another point of this slide is that when you start breaking this down, we're going to start getting closer to the student experience. Remember, we're measuring a student experience here. We're measuring the amalgamation of a large number of steps that go into a student getting from point A to transfer. Lots of people fall off. But to the student, that's a series of steps. And so as you start unpacking this a little bit, in California, by the way, we are the only state in the nation who uses the term basic skills for dev ed. But we use this term basic skills to refer. We could look at what are the transfer rates of dev ed students. And I'll actually show you some data in a second here on this. But as you know, if you go down 2 or 3 levels into dev ed, the transfer rates, by the way, are, by any measure, and I don't like putting value judgments on data, not very good. Right? They hover in the 10% range. By the way, and I actually think this group is going to get this one. What is one group of students on your campus who often tests 2 and 3 levels below, who have transfer rates that are sometimes, and completion rates, 3 or 4 times the average when they come in at the start? Any guesses what that group might be? Shout a little louder. Disabled students, good guess. EOPS, ESL is always, yes, you get ESL a lot. ESL is a really interesting one. It tends to be slightly better, but it tends a lot to do with the ratio of your international to immigrant ESL has a lot to do with that. Other guesses you'll get are trio, learning communities. Any coaches in the room? Know who the answer is? It's athletes. Athletes, if you look at the data, athletes on average have much higher transfer and completion rates than their cohort of incoming freshmen, right? Now, I'm glad, I see KC down here. She's not like doing this to me, so hopefully it's true here too. But, so why is that, by the way? Why is that? They have counselors dedicated. Okay, so I'll give you, it's hard to hear, but I'm going to go with what I usually hear. They're a cohort. They have a coach invested in their success. And by the way, I changed that word coach to institutional agent, because if you think about it, yes, athletes have coaches, but there's an opportunity across our curriculum for lots of institutional agents to own student success. By the way, that also tends to happen in cohort-based CTE programs, right? Career tech programs, that's very happening. So we have an institutional agent. We have a ticking time clock. Students who start in athletics need to get somewhere in 2 or 3 years, or they're going to lose the number of years they can play sports. Other things we have students invested in each other's success, right? They don't want their peers who, unless they're the second teamer and the first teamer, they don't want their peers to not succeed because they want the team to play well. And so we think about other things like tutoring, lecture halls, study halls. And again, the point of this is not that we do for athletes, we do for everyone what we do for athletes, although we see higher success rates there. But you start thinking about the features of what we do for athletes and how that might translate into other parts of the population. So when we get to, in a second, these idea of principles of redesign, this one comes over pretty well when you look at what we do for athletes. So, but anyways, we're looking at this particular point. We could take a look at, for example, the presence of learning communities, right? And many colleges have looked at, by the way, learning communities have become a catch-all term for a lot of different things. But in various places that have seen success with learning communities, like Kingsborough in New York, or even Cal State East Bay, learning communities have been shown to have a beneficial effect on transfer rates. And again, you might ask why that is, and you see some of the same answers that you do in the athletes. By the way, actually, at Skyline, they have an athletes learning community. But when you start breaking it down more, you look at other features that might be related to successful transfer. Things like enrolling full-time. Good set of data on what enrolling full-time does for transfer rates. By the way, we tend to think we don't control whether students enroll full-time. That's one of those hypotheses I think has sunk into our ethos, that we don't control whether students enroll full-time, they have lives. Well, maybe we do control that more than we think. You know, Diego Navarro down at Cabrillo with what's now the Bridges to something, what used to be Digital Bridge project, he gets students, migrant farm workers from Watsonville, to enroll full-time at Cabrillo. It's a small program, but it is possible to do some things that get students to enroll full-time. I'm going to come back to this in a little minute too, but the redesign at CUNY in New York, the City University of New York designed a new community college, and they are requiring students to go full-time, right? I'm going to come back to that because there's some interesting things about that redesign that also will come up later here. But the point here is that there are other things we can start unpacking here that we actually have research on, completing a student educational plan. You know, Dr. Chong brought this up. I'm going to bring this up again. The notion that students know what path they're on. Like right now, if I was to ask you what percentage of students in your class know what path they're on, if you're teaching in GE, it's probably not going to be a big answer, right? And except for the CTE students who are taking GE. We're going to come back to this distinction of CTE and GE as well. Enrolling in programs like MESA, taking summer courses. But as you get down to a more granular level, what's the world look like to the student? And the student ambassadors in the room always nod when this slide comes up, and it's this. The world to one of our students looks at least this chaotic, by the way, and we only have put like 20 or 23 points on here. Think again about the student experience and the student progression through your institution, all of our institutions. And again, the point of each of these things, there's a dual point here. One is we can study each of these things, by the way, if we had time and resources and the data and the will. But the other point here is that it is relative chaos, right? Very good friend of mine, Ian Walton, who's former state academic senate president, loves this slide too. He talks about this slide, really resonates with faculty, Rob, but I got one problem with this slide. And he's a mathematician. It's linear. It shows a linear progression of students through our institutions when in fact, it's often curving back on itself in multi-dimensions. So this is actually a true story. Our infographics guy, Greg Staup, who's also a VP of the RP group, who's brilliant with this stuff. This is his slide. We actually sent him back to try to represent this in a nonlinear fashion. And he finally, after a couple of days, he basically quit. He said, no, we can't do that. But again, the point here is the experience of the student is at least this chaotic, right? And so we're going to come back to what this means for us in a second. And I'll talk this afternoon in the Culture of Inquiry breakout about this as well. So let's kind of do a brief overview first of the completion agenda. Let me ask you this. Do you get a warm and fuzzy feeling when you hear the term completion agenda? Most people don't. But the bottom line here is this is not just the Student Success Task Force here in California. In fact, I would argue that the Student Success Task Force in California is responding to the national movement here on completion. Here's the good news. The good news is there is an unprecedented level of inquiry and insights into the community college sector, which historically has been invisible, not only in higher ed, but in education, right? If you talk about the national discourse on education, it's K-12, 70%, higher ed, as defined by four-year universities, 28%, and 2% community colleges. In the last 5 years, this really has changed. And folks like Dr. Chong and Martha going to DC from the community college sector. Remember, Martha's appointment there was the first time ever we had a community college person that high. And you got to give Arnie Duncan and the administration a lot of credit for elevating the stature of community colleges, right? Now, with that comes a price, right? You can't just hide under the radar anymore. People start asking, which I think largely are good questions about how are we doing in the community college sector. Now, yes, the press and others nationally tend to take the most negative view you can given a set of data. And one of my big complaints about it, and we're going to talk about this in a second, is they take a less complete view of completion than I think is really actually true in community colleges. And there's not a whole lot of nuance in the way that the national movement looks at community colleges. For the most part, though, you look at things like the White House, Complete College America, here in California, the task force, other organizations, the idea that completion is at the forefront of what we should be doing in the community colleges is not going away, right? I think we just have to we can either fight it or accept it. And what I would love to do with it is try to go down to the bottom 2 points, is get a more complete view of what completion means in the community college sector. So here's an example. Peter Barr is a University of Michigan researcher who works with the Chancellor's Office and with us in RP, recently did a segmentation study where he went and looked at behavioral patterns of students in our system. He looked at, I think, at 200,000 plus students who entered in, I think it was 0304. And he did a cluster analysis on them, a statistical technique to separate them into like groups. And so you get, when you do this behaviorally, you get a group that's primarily focused on transfer. Actually, in his case, you got one that was really successful at it and one that wasn't. You get a couple of other groups, one that are highly CTE focused, but you get this very interesting group. There's a group of students in our system who come into our colleges, first-time students, by the way. They take exactly 1 or 2 courses, and we never see them again, right? The success rate, by the way, of those students that he identified in this cluster is 95%. So 95% of them come in, take 1 or 2 courses, we never see them again. How big do you think that group is, percentage-wise, of the overall first time in college? It's about a third. A third of the students in the sector come in, take 1 or 2 courses, have 95% success rates, we never see them again, right? So think about that for a second. What does completion mean to those students? Who are those students, first of all? When you go back and look a little deeper, there's a bunch of people who are in there. Are there some lifelong learners who come in and take 1 or 2 courses? Yes. Although, by the way, mostly, and we get in trouble for this, the lifelong learners don't tend to take 1 or 2 courses. They tend to take 25 courses, which is a high subject of debate. And so, by the way, that if you think about segments of students, there's an argument that can be made that's a perfectly good segment of students for our system to be serving. It's come under attack because of budgetary reasons, but that is also a segment of our students. But most of those students who are in those 1 and 2 courses are taking classes. What departments or disciplines do you think they're taking it in? Business, computer science, accounting, and sometimes math to get a math level. So who are those students? For the most part, these are students who already have jobs, they're in industry, and they're engaging in career advancement, right? Or saving a job because they're strengthening their skill set. So from an economic standpoint, if you look at wage gains and you look at employment rates, this is one of our most successful groups in the community college sector. It's big. It may not be quite as big of a third anymore because of all the budget cuts affect that group probably more than our other group. But that's a big group of students who is incredibly successful that we don't measure anywhere. None of our accountability measures, in fact, not only do we not measure them, Many of our accountability measures are drawn down because they're in the denominator. Right? You just go first time in college, that like I was talking about earlier with that 20% success rate, you go first time in college only, you're going to have all those students in the denominator with no chance, they never had any intent or any chance of hitting, quote unquote, the classic completion metrics. And by the way, the classic completion metrics are certificate of 1 year or more, degree, or transfer, right? And again, by the way, those are perfectly good metrics. The point is they're not the only metrics that define community colleges, right? So this notion of the skills builder being part of, Peter called them skills builders. Because for many of these students, by the way, let's just take the ones who are in technology. You know, if they're coming in and getting Cisco training in 1 or 2 courses, there's an immediate wage gain and job security associated with that. You know, that is absolutely a successful completion. So one of the things, and by the way, I know that Dr. Chong and others, myself and guys like Davis Jenkins, keep reminding people of this, those who actually understand the ground level of community colleges. But it is an uphill climb with policymakers and legislatures. So this is a challenge we run into as we think about this, but this kind of points to this need for a nuanced view. Mary was very nice to give me what I'm assuming is vodka here. No, probably not. Probably water. So now we're going to talk a little bit about completion by design. So completion by design, as Dr. Chong mentioned, is the signature higher ed investment of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And again, having worked in this foundation world a bunch in the last 5 years, Gates has been hesitant to make practice-level investments in higher ed. Gates, on average, by the way, they are the biggest foundation by far by a factor of, it's either 2 or 3. They have to spend, I heard this number once and it just baffled me. I think it's that they have to spend $600 million a year to keep their nonprofit tax status. It's some ridiculous number like that. I think it's $60 billion that they have, some ridiculous number like that. But they hadn't spent much of that. They do a lot of great things around the world, but they hadn't spent much of that in higher ed. And what they had done in higher ed was technology focused. So a couple years ago, they started asking some advisors, and Dr. Chong and myself and a bunch of others started giving them some advice on their higher ed strategy. And one of the things, and Davis as well, Jenkins and CCRC, was to focus on the idea that we could think about the student experience differently in community colleges. We could structure our institutions to actually manage the student experience. If I asked you right now, is your institution structured to manage the student experience and to accelerate their progression from point A to whatever their outcome is? I can't think of an institution in the country that's going to say yes. Actually, I can think of one who would say yes to that. And they won the Aspen Prize in Valencia, because they actually do focus specifically at every part of their institution on that notion of accelerating students through to their goals, whatever those happen to be. But this initiative has the idea of significantly raising completion rates for most students. Gates tends to focus on low-income students under 26. But the type of things we're going to talk about are relevant for our students. And I have to say that having worked on it in the planning year, that whole under 26 thing has not been a key thread going into this. 4 states were selected to do this. California applied, and because of a host of reasons, most of which involve infrastructure at the policy and state level, California doesn't compete well for these projects. And it's an unfortunate thing we're trying to change. And it's easier for Dr. Chong to get, like you guys, to get individual, like the Gateway to Completion grants. I think you guys have a great chance at that. I think it's a really good grant. Now that those type of things we can do because they're single colleges. When it requires any type of state-level infrastructure or policy, we suffer in this state. For better or for worse, we do not have strong statewide infrastructure in higher ed, in community colleges in this state. So these other states, Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, Texas, were advantaged because they have pretty good state structures, right? And so one of the things that I try to do in working on this project is bring back to California the thinking and the thought capital that's being developed in these other states. And Gates is very aware this project is not about 21 colleges. And there's 1,200 colleges nationally. We could move the needle on these 21, and if it never was shared across the country, it wouldn't be a good result for the project and the initiative. So we've been working in the last year. The planning year just ended, so I spent most of the last year in these 4 states. And we're moving toward 2 years of implementation and the idea of scale and adoption. One of the key hallmarks of this project is not innovation in pockets, but it's actually innovation at scale. And that's a really tough concept to get your head around. It's a really tough thing to implement. And I have to say these colleges, many of whom are like us here in California. One of them is Miami-Dade, largest community college in the country, 92% underrepresented minority students, high poverty areas. Also, by the way, produced some of the highest outcomes in the country. It was one of the top 10 finalists in the Aspen Prize. The colleges in Texas, some of which are big multi-college districts like us, Dallas, Houston, Alamo. There's one of the reasons I like this project is among those colleges, there's a college that's kind of like any college in California. There's a small college in North Carolina. I love this. It's basically a horse farm college. Like equine and equestrian is over 50% of their enrollment. So we have a wide range of small and big colleges. We've got a hand back there. We've got an equine program. Good. And so this is the good thing about this is there's something in there for all of us to learn from. And so what's the challenge of completion? I am going to say that for the most part, completion by design focuses on the type of completion that involves certificates, transfer, and degrees, right? So let's just accept that for a second and know that even the people behind this understand there are other types of completion, but we're going to focus on that group, which, by the way, on most campuses, probably more so on a junior college than most too, is 50–60% of the students are on one of those pathways to one-year certificates or more. And it's, by the way, an interesting thing to do as a segmentation sometimes to try to figure that out on your own campus. But for colleges, what are the challenges? Well, financially, this is a real controversial one. This isn't my favorite one on here, but it's that incentives are aligned with access, not completion. This smacks to everyone of performance-based funding immediately. But it is, just a note on performance-based funding, is that I think it's important to understand why people look to performance-based funding as an answer. Because it is absolutely true for these people, most of whom come from industry, that we incent butts and seats in our system. It is an incontrovertible fact that we are funded by butts and seats, right? We're actually funded by butts and seats in most states at the end of the third week, right? So there really aren't incentives to completion for the college. Now again, I've yet to see a performance-based funding model work. So the counter-argument to this, in Louisiana was probably the closest, and it's still, I don't know, Frank, if you know of any others, but I haven't seen any that have worked real well. But you understand where this comes from, is this thought that if we incent completion, colleges will magically transform themselves to produce completion. Of course, most of us in the colleges raise our hands and go, won't we just put more people through to get money, or we have an incentive to do that now, or some colleges will do that and not others. So there's a lot to unpack here for that. But the bottom line here is, financially, we aren't particularly incented for completion. And the more important financial one from a challenge is, obviously, we're under-resourced. This is true nationally, by the way. It's particularly true in California. What are we, 48th in funding per FTES now? It's something crazy like that. And remember, most states, our model is particularly insane here in California, right? Most states have 2 or 3 sources of funding. They may have a local parcel tax, which are far more common in other states. They keep their tuition in most states, right? The tuition doesn't go to the state and get back to us in apportionment, and they get apportionment. And by the way, none of that is capped in 48 of the states. So this particular state, California, has a serious problem with under-resourcing. And by the way, wearing another one of my hats, which is doing a lot of ROI, return on investment and cost-benefit work, that's a big challenge in California. Because if you actually get more students to be successful, you've got a little bit of a problem here when you have an enrollment cap, right? And so we are in a quandary in California because we are being told by everyone, increase success, which, by the way, means if we don't increase the enrollment caps, somebody gets forced out, right? And that's an interesting question about who gets forced out and whether we actually plan for that or it happens. One of the intriguing things about the enrollment cap is it's based on our historical lack of success, right? When you go down and just think about Dev Ed, Math, and English for a second. By the way, this is not to slam Dev Ed, Math, and English teachers, because I fundamentally believe it's the structure and not the faculty. But when you think about the fact that our enrollment caps are based on many people not getting through, if we get all those people through, wow, we've got an interesting problem on our hands, right? I hope we have that problem because we actually get more students through, but it is a problem in California, especially. Innovations tend to be isolated. I guarantee you guys are doing 20 innovative things on this campus, if not more, some of which are at the programmatic level. But let me ask you this, how many innovative things are you doing for every incoming freshman? Or for large groups of incoming freshmen, or for large groups of returning students? And this isn't you guys, by the way, this is all of us. Right? When we have innovations, when someone wants to do a pilot, what ends up happening if they're a faculty member? How many students do they get to serve? 35, because it's usually one section, right? And again, the nature of pilots is such that if we allow that pilot to then grow if it works, that's great. But historically, we don't have a lot of success with that in our system. We've got lots of pilots that actually even worked that for one reason or another haven't moved to scale, right? So the notion of scale is a challenge for community colleges. And of course, org change is hard under any circumstances, and it's particularly hard in higher ed, right? If you go into a classroom now that, let's say it's opening day, and you go into a psych classroom. I used to teach psych, so I'll throw myself in. Sorry for my other fellow psych faculty. I'm sure this isn't true of you. But if you go into a psych classroom now, how different does that classroom and the pedagogy look than it did in 1914? Good faculty were doing good things in 1914, but the structure, the way the course is structured, the way the content is structured, what may have changed a little bit is our approach to pedagogy. But for the most part, this looks the same way it has, and I'd argue, for hundreds of years, right? So there's a question about how we deliver courses and how we engage students. Frank talked earlier about faculty, the highest level being those who inspire students. And I totally agree with that. But I think there's actually a tandem to the inspiring students, which is producing better student outcomes. Right? There are very few. When you look at the Aspen Prize finalists and the ones who rose to the top, you look at a couple of the common threads there. One of them is a focus on innovation and experimentation at larger groups, more at scale. Valencia, the winner, one of the interesting things they do is every incoming faculty member does an action research project on their students and student success. And they have a forum for each of those people to talk about it, and it creates a campus-wide dialogue about student success and outcomes that permeates every part of the campus, right? It's part of the review process. They don't have tenure in Florida, but it is part of the review process that everyone is focusing on outcomes from day one, so it creates a campus culture that looks at that, right? That's actually focused on outcomes. If you look at the other colleges who get there, one of these threads is how they actually focus on, are we producing outcomes? And by the way, the SLO movement, which I know has been painful, I'm sure your SLO assessment coordinator would share that pain. Part of that movement has been painful because we've let this become mechanic. We've let this become about, did you assess your SLOs, rather than what most of our people in this room, faculty, student services professionals, are really dedicated to, which is student success and student achieving of the outcomes. And where SLOs have taken hold, it's been because, usually in pockets, faculty or administrators or student service professionals have really owned over the process of, I really do want to know how I can make this better, how I can produce stronger student outcomes. And you see that thread moving through. And it takes, by the way, a safe environment to do that in, because you have to also look inward. I used to teach psych the same way everyone I'd always taught psych to me had taught it. We went through the 14 chapters of the book. We did a quiz at the end of each, and we moved on to the next chapter. And I had some colleagues at Foothill who started doing things like letting the students pick their evaluation mechanism. Interesting idea. Elizabeth Barkley, music faculty, started this where she actually set up where students for 50% of their grade could pick whether they did an in-class exam, a take-home one-day exam, an essay, or a presentation for 50% of their grade. And it's amazing when you do focus groups with those students afterwards about their experience in the classroom. It's transformational. They now get to play to their strengths in a meeting with the content. And by the way, you do have to eventually pay attention to the fact that if we only let people play to their strengths, there are other parts of an institutional set of learning outcomes we might need to attend to. But that type of idea, that type of reform within the classroom, if you look at these colleges who are at the head of the Aspen Prize line, and by the way, there's lots of excellence across the country. The last thing I ever say about the Aspen Prize is we found the 10 best. These are 10 excellent colleges. But they have this thread of looking at these outcomes in a way that is more holistic and actually thinking about it in terms of how can we improve student success. And that thread really is woven through the institution. What's the challenge of completion for students? Easy to enroll, easy to drop out, right? Another big one is many enter without a clear plan, and we're going to come back to this clear plan. And then, of course, there's the non-cognitive stuff. We always focus on the cognitive stuff. There's a lot of work on the non-cognitive side of the house, on motivation, on social capital, on hope, suggesting that these things are major factors, by the way. And by the way, this is an interesting one, because if you think about where students interact with our organization, there's a study, and I've been trying to chase this down for 8 years, which might mean I made it up, but if I can't find the resource. But I heard of a study, or made it up, that it logically makes sense, so I'm willing to go with it. If you think about the student who's just about to come to campus next week and enter the classroom for the first time, how many different departments has that student touched in your institution before they got to that first class? And it hovers between 9 and 12, right? Outreach. If you think of the catalog, you get to marketing, financial aid, placement testing, right? Admissions and records, all the, by the way, the prototypical student services functions that very often define the student experience up front. And this is a key piece of this, is that these non-cognitive factors are absolutely affected by how the student perceives those experiences, right? Then when you get to the classroom, you got a whole other set of experiences, which is that we see the classroom as the unit of measure, when in fact to the student, it's everything that's happening around that classroom with them, right? So it's an interesting thing to think about. So how can a community college raise completion rates for a large number of students while containing costs, maintaining open access, and ensuring quality? No small task, right? And so CBD takes the tack that the way to do this is to really focus on this notion of pathways, developing strong and, by the way, structured completion pathways for students. Not to say that we're going to have everyone who shows up on day one pick their structure for the next 5 years they can't get off, which I think is the French model of education, right? You pick it. I think it is. Someone tell me if I'm wrong, but I think many European models, you are tracked that way even before you start. We're not talking about getting quite that strong of a structured pathway. But if you think about what happens now, we frankly are at the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Students come in and they really don't. And counselors do all they can in a limited amount of time with a limited amount of resources. But we're not structured to help students make a decision about where they want to go. And by the way, say what you will about the gainful employment regulations, and I was still a researcher at Skyline while this happened, so I felt the pain of the gainful employment regulations. If you guys don't know what those are, that was the idea. It was mainly an attack on the for-profits, producing high numbers of graduates with ridiculous amounts of debt and no market value. Right? Sound familiar? But we were asked to do the same thing in the community colleges, and what's interesting about that is I love the idea of telling students, here's the value of what you're actually working on, and here's how much debt you might accumulate. Now, it was painful, and there's a lot of methodological things that colleagues of Dr. Chong, not him, of course, in the Department of Ed, there were some challenges in how they implemented it. But the theory behind that is, what is it going to mean when I do get into this career? And so, by the way, I said earlier we'd come back to this distinction. This notion that CTE and Gen Ed students are fundamentally different, I have always found rather insane, right? Every single one of our students is career-focused. They're either career-focused in the short term, they're taking 1 or 2 courses, towards a 1-year certificate, maybe a 2-year certificate, maybe a terminal degree. But those students who transfer, by the way, they're still going down a career path, right? They may not know it yet. They may not know which one they're going to go down. But all of them, none of them come to higher education, unfortunately. Maybe some of us long for the days we thought this happened. I don't think it ever happened. But where they went to college for the sake of the love of learning, right? How many of you think you have lots of students who are here for the sake of the love of learning? Maybe there are more than I think, but I certainly didn't have a lot of those. And partially this is because we've set the system up this way. But again, all of them are here not as a destination. They're not even at a 4-year school as a destination if they're on the transfer path. It is a transitional phase in their lives between not knowing much about what they're going to do with their lives to hopefully knowing either more or where they're going to start. And so for us, in our world, we have this unique, like at least in the 4-year schools, folks are they're getting pretty much into a track sooner, right? People are picking which path they're on. Here, we don't do that as often. We do it, by the way, in CTE sometimes. But this is not about making the institutions all CTE institutions. It has nothing to do with that. It's about thinking of the role of a general education in the context of students being on this transitional pathway, right? So one of the questions I'll ask is, how many 13-year-olds are out there you think going, you know what I want to be when I grow up? I want to be a phlebotomist. I want to draw blood for a living. Any phlebotomists in the room? Do you have a phlebotomy program here? Cool. I'm not picking on you guys. I'm using you as a good example, right? Maybe you thought that, whoever the phlebotomy people are. But I don't think there's a lot of 13-year-olds sitting around saying, I want to be a phlebotomist. So why is it that those programs and many of the allied health programs are so valued by students? Well, one, they know what the back end's going to be. I'm going to get a job. It's fairly high paying. And by the way, there's some question about whether all allied health jobs are high paying, or there's availability. But there's a fairly well-paying job. There's a high chance I'm going to get it. And by the way, here's an interesting fact. They know exactly what they need to do to get there. Now, whether they can do that or not is an interesting question, whether everyone could go on that path. But if you think about the structure in the CTE programs, you know exactly what you're going to do to get there. We did focus groups on this project in Completion by Design with students. And there's this notion that students are finding themselves, right? in community colleges, and absolutely some of them are. One of our fairly resistant faculty members, which I thought was great, I love this, said, how can I expect a student to know what they want to do with their life when they don't know what they had for breakfast? Right? They don't know what they want for breakfast. They don't know what they're going to do tomorrow. So part of this is about the idea that we can help students make these choices. First of all, by the way, by pointing out what the paths are. You ever picked up a catalog at most of our colleges? Miami-Dade's both the best example and the worst offender of this. They have 300 majors and programs. And by the way, for most part, the way we on-ramp students and intake students is to hand them the catalog, and if they're lucky, they get a short session with a counselor, right? This notion of doing academic planning, we really struggle with. And by the way, this is no way a slam on counselors. They do the best they can with limited resources. But I had a counselor walk up to me at one of these sessions and say, you know what about the bigger challenges for me? Is people ask me, what's it like to be a phlebotomist? And I don't have any answer to what it's like to be a phlebotomist. The only person who knows that are the faculty in the phlebotomy program. So I send them there. But if you think about that for a second, how do we get students information about what it's like to be in these programs? And for those who are on a general education path, what is the progression of courses and the structure they need to move through that? So one of the hallmarks here is we're thinking about redesigning. And one of the things I will say about this project is this is not change with a small c we're talking about here. This is change with a big C. And that's both scary and an amazing opportunity. If you look at the change efforts in the community colleges in the last 40 years, I would argue that 99.99% of it is change with a small c. Right? We have been trying to change things on the margins, but the fundamental structure hasn't been changed for the most part. Right? There are some exceptions to this. But we're talking here about the notion of redesign, and it's scary at points, of really trying to get colleges to think about changing how we look at students and how we look at their progression through the college. So some things to think about. Analyzing and understanding barriers and momentum points that students experience. We're going to do a little bit in a second on what I call the CBD calls the lost momentum framework. Students experience moments that are either slow the momentum or accelerate it towards their path. And those moments largely happen in the fashion they did on the chaos slide. They're almost completely random when they happen. And it doesn't have to be that way. We could structure that a little bit differently. This idea of implementing and integrating proven and promising practices, again, with the focus of the quickest, straightest path to completion. Does this mean we also do acceleration in Dev Ed, Math, and English? Might be promising, might be something to try. It's not the only answer. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about an alignment of things that move you toward completion. This is a big one for me. Creating the conditions for change by empowering interdisciplinary and cross-campus groups. And so this afternoon, when I talk about a culture of inquiry, we're going to take a look at some results I've got from this thing I do called 3 Studies to Move a Campus Conversation about Student Success. And the key point in there is that most of the reason these end up having lots of resonance is we opened it up to groups like, not this big, but groups of 20 to 40 people from across a campus to explore what the data means and to leverage the subject matter expertise in the room. We don't do this very often. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you were in a standing campus committee meeting, either department or governance meeting, where you sat in that meeting and took more than 10 minutes to explore a student success outcome and what you might do about it? Anyone have an example of when that happened? Think back. So this, by the way, happens in every presentation I've ever given. And usually I'll get, occasionally I'll get 1 or 2 people say, yeah, we have a student success committee who looks at that, right? But even that committee, when I ask the next question, what were the action steps that came out of that? This stops 99% of the conversation because we haven't set ourselves up where this is the goal of what we do on a campus, right? We've set ourselves up to teach classes and offer services. Okay? And again, that's not saying those aren't valuable goals, but if we are really trying to maximize completion, we can't just teach classes and offer services, right? And maybe that's being a community college in the 21st century, or the New World Order, or the order of accountability. But I think that's really a fundamental thing we have to wrap our heads around, right? By the way, it's comfortable to just teach classes and offer services, but if we are actually interested in getting results that are improved, we may not be able to look at it that way anymore. And so, let's skip this. We're going to, some discussion questions, and what we'll do with these is again, it's 500 people, not really a chance to discuss these things. We'll talk about these more this afternoon, if in the breakout sessions. But and by the way, reactions to this vary widely from, I hate this idea, to I think this is the best idea I've ever heard, right? So think about what your reactions might be, and what are some unique opportunities or challenges that you might have to think about things in this way at Santa Rosa. And I'm going to move on now to the lost momentum framework. So this, I think, is an important way of thinking about how students experience our college. So the idea is that no matter what the outcome, what the completion outcome we're trying to maximize, whether it's one-year certificate, transfer, graduation, or even those short terms, students go through 4 phases. This isn't rocket science, but the idea is connection is interest to application. And I'm going to talk a little bit in a second about what connection means. Entry, enrollment of completion to completion of gatekeeper courses. Progress, entry into course of study to 75% of the requirements completed and completion. What's interesting about this is what change we have done in our system exists somewhere about over here. We focus a lot on this, placement testing, diagnostic placement testing, dev ed, getting people into courses. We don't talk a lot about how students progress through here. And so when we do these in workshops, what I'll do now is ask you, what do you think are some of the loss points that are known that you would think for your student populations? What are the loss points for students at each of these phases? And we kind of go through that. But for here are some of the common ones we see. At connection, you get ideas of students never applying to college, delaying entry, high rates of testing into dev ed, and then these what I call information gaps. I'm not putting this at the feet of the counselors. I'm saying this is an institutional information gap for students about program-specific guidance, about financial aid. This is something we could be stronger at. Loss points for entry, unstructured programs and too many choices. So this is a controversial one, right? The idea that programs need A, more structure, and B, we might have too many choices. So when you think about science and becoming, let's say, a physics major, you know day one pretty much exactly the courses you're going to take in your 4-year sequence. And although not everyone is ready to do that, there's an interesting comfort for those students in the fact that they actually know what they need to get from here to there. This CUNY college, this new community college at CUNY that I was talking about, they did an interesting thing. They got a chance to start from scratch, which we obviously don't have. Redesign is very different from starting from scratch in order to change. But they had a chance to start from scratch. They have exactly 5 majors. And this is not going to be a small college. I think they're trying to get to 6,000 students, if I remember correctly, by year 2. They have exactly 5 majors. Students choose between those 5 majors, and they have what I love about this, and I'll show this afternoon if I have an internet connection. You can click on there ahead of time and see your course path for your 2 years there. It's prescribed, it's structured. And by the way, there is an ability to move between the majors, and it has some of that going on. Interesting other thing they're doing, which is a whole different conversation, there's no dev ed. It's all contextualized into the curriculum. There's a summer boot camp, and it's all contextualized into the curriculum. Interesting to see how, now they're also all full-time. I did say that earlier. That's a big caveat. But they're going to be enrolling their first class this fall, and I guarantee you, there's a lot of people in here to place individual bets with. But in a couple years, we're going to see success rates from that college that are much higher than what we see nationwide. Because we have highly structured programs, we have a clear pathway for students, and we're integrating and contextualizing dev ed into the curriculum. The idea of the work, there's some other things going on here that we could talk about as loss points. One of my big ones is this third one under progress. Progress isn't monitored, nor is feedback given. When do we communicate to students about their progress as an institution right now? What are the 2 cases it happens? They're failing or they're finishing. These are the 2 times we talk to them for the most part. You're on academic probation or you're in danger of being on academic probation, or congratulations, you're eligible for graduation. By the way, that last step, it doesn't happen everywhere. Many of those students have to navigate what they actually would have to do to apply for graduation, right? So one easy way to increase graduation rates is to make that more automatic. But think about this idea of monitoring feedback. Let's go to the positive side here, what we could do. And I'll focus on this one because I'm sensitive to time. This notion that we have progress to completion monitored and feedback provided. There's a school in Ohio, Sinclair, who's one of our CBD schools, who before this project already had a software package called MAPS. And what MAPS does is when the student registers for courses, it checks to see if the student is registering for courses that are on their academic pathway. And if they don't, it says to them, hey, Rob, did you realize you're registering for a course that's not on your pathway? By the way, in the end, it'll let them do it if they want to. But it tells them, you're registering for a course in your pathway. And so the guy who runs this in Ohio, Russ Little, I made a suggestion to him, which is the next step of this is to say, even get down to, hey, guess what? You've completed that distribution requirement or graduation requirement 3 times already when you've enrolled for this class. How about these 2 you haven't tried yet, and here's open sections, right? So think about that. Yes, there's a software piece to this. Walla Walla in Washington does a very similar thing. In Walla Walla, one of the other Aspen Prize finalists, they actually have software where everyone in the institution can see the pathway that students are on. Right? They give them, let them act, so you, faculty, staff member, administrator can see, here's the pathway students are on. Right? And so that, by the way, has a lot of benefits. You actually can understand as faculty, if you have a student who's struggling, what are they trying to do? Right? But you actually know what path they're on. This notion of being on path or off path, to me, is brilliant. And yeah, there's a software piece to it. I get it. And by the way, both Walla Walla and Sinclair are starting are getting grants to license that software so the rest of us can share in it. South Orange is doing something somewhat akin to this. But other things about monitoring progress, the idea, by the way, that we could actually tell people that they're doing well. Congratulations, you've completed 30 units, you're halfway there. Did you know that these are the classes you need to get there? Right? We could do that today. Like that we absolutely could do today. It would take a little bit of programming, and yes, everything takes time. But just think of the dynamic we'd be changing there with our students. Right? Things like, by the way, the other place where we use information occasionally is early alert programs. Right? Now, early alert programs at most of our colleges, you guys may be an exception, don't really hit that many students and don't produce that big of an effect because it's often too late. But focusing on the positive side here, we really could use that information to manage that student experience. Another thing we could do, by the way, Regina, my former president at Skyline, will not keep bringing this. She brings up this idea every time I see her. Why can't we tell students what major, what degree or certificate they're actually closer to than the one they think they're on? And this, again, someone raises their hand and said, I am an international business major. And you actually look at their transcript and say, guess what? You could maybe focus in international business, but you've actually already completed all but one course over here. Again, we could do that. Writing these algorithms is not easy. I'm not trying to minimize. The IT folks are like, great, Rob, thanks. A&R is like, oh, you. But again, with resources, student services VP is like, get him off the stage. But these are things we could do. Another one, by the way, which I'll also talk about this afternoon, is some of you may have seen this work I've done before, where I actually look at students who are in course sequences, say Dev Ed Math as an example, which, by the way, is not the only example. Students who get a C in, say, beginning algebra, when they move on to intermediate algebra, we'd expect them to do slightly worse than students who get a B or an A. I'll show you the data this afternoon. It's crazy what that relationship is. On average, and this is on average, what I see when I do this is students who get an A in beginning algebra hover in the 75% success range when they move on. Students who get a B are in the high 40s to low 50s. Students who get a C range between 17 and 35% when they move on. So that's a stark reality of what it means to move on in a course sequence. And by the way, it's that the effect, although the course success rates are higher, holds in the sciences too. Organic chemistry is usually one of the places where this is the hardest. Students who get a C in the first course when they move to the second one are screwed, right? By the way, which is why I'm not a doctor. That happened to me. That happened to me in sophomore year. I got a C in the first class, dropped the second one, and here I am. So I'm not sure that's a good or a bad story. But here's, by the way, from managing information, here's another spot. We know who the students who got the C's are. When they enrolled for the next course, could we not, and what we could do here is a list of like 15 things. I don't have the right answer. We could tell them, hey, guess what? You got a C. And this is another former president of mine, Bernadine Fong, would say, you have been selected for this special opportunity of being enrolled in this student success course. It's going to help you in intermediate algebra. You know, we could go that level. Or we could say, hey, guess what? We have tutoring services. We know that beginning algebra was a struggle. Here's a suite of those services. There's a whole range of things we could do there to use that information we already have. So this one's a big one for me, because a lot of this big redesign stuff we talk about here, like restructuring programs and changing the overall structure of programs, is long-term and challenging. Some of this stuff about using the information we already have has quicker turnaround. And again, this notion of integrating student services and instruction is big here. So as usual, I've gone over on time. So we're going to skip data, because no one likes data. Casey likes data. Casey, come this afternoon. I'll show you the data this afternoon. Never once gotten to all my slides. I gave Russ actually extra slides in case I got through this too quickly, and that was just idiotic. All right, I want to go through these and end with these because I think these can be really useful. And by the way, I'm very happy to come back and work with groups on the college to talk about this stuff. But the idea of what did we do? What were the design principles that we focused on? And so if you go back to this pathway, this idea of the pathway from considering educations to entering programs of study, I would say that's the one hallmark that goes through this is the notion of entering programs of study. So here are the principles. Actually, this is the current pathway design. This is using a kind of the idea of what's the status quo right now. And this should look familiar because I haven't seen a college where this isn't the case. AA requirements tend not to be aligned with requirements for junior standing at a major and transfer institutions. Wow, is this true in California? And this really isn't our fault, by the way, because everyone's trying. But this is a 112 to 25 to 13 matrix right now, right? I don't know what the math is on that, but it's big, right? The actually figuring out what requirements, and think about the student perspective on this. Maybe they've changed their mind from wanting to go to Sonoma State to San Francisco State, and now all of a sudden those 4 courses they took to prepare themselves for Sonoma State don't prepare them for SF State. This isn't a Santa Rosa problem. This is a statewide policy and infrastructure problem. You know, Florida gets both held up as an example and, you know, treated with complete vitriol for its common course numbering system, but you don't have that problem in Florida. Like, you know what aligns to what there in the state education system in Florida. But this idea that they're not, but this is a big one. There's a lack of clear pathways to transfer and a lot of choices, right? If you can have the debate about the second one, whether it's a good or bad idea to have lots of choices, but independent from that, if you say, yeah, we do want to have a lot of choices, the pathways need to be more clear. I think they're clearly not, it's not in the minds of students clear how to get from point A to point B. Those focus groups, they tell you, exact quotes, tell me how to get to where I want to go. They don't say, let me wander around the curriculum for 3 years and we'll figure this out later. They don't say that. Some of them may not know enough to say either, but most of them say things like, I want to figure out where I need to go and I want you to tell me how to get there. And then I want to be able to get there, right? They tell you that too. Again, we just talked about the progress. No mechanism to inform choice of major pathway. This last one I know is controversial too. DevEd's narrowly focused on math and English, not customized to particular paths. And that notion has a 30-year history, but if you look at programs like iBest in Washington or the Career Advancement Academies in California that have looked at contextualizing DevEd to careers, the success rate in those courses are much higher. Now, are we going to do that to all 300 of our majors? Of course not. But Miami-Dade's doing a really interesting thing here. They've decided they're going to do communities of interest. They're going to pick 5 big areas, and they're going to contextualize DevEd, math, and English to the 5 big areas. Business, social science, natural science, humanities. I don't remember what the other one is. But they're going to go down the path of having a math course for those majors. Ian Walton, again, I laughed at this when we said, yeah, Rob, we did that in the 70s. That whole idea of contextualizing. And did it work? He's like, yeah, actually, it really did work. Then why didn't we do it more? I don't know. This is the history of innovation and change in our system, right? Things that work die for a host of reasons, but they don't tend to get scaled. So when you think about these design principles, think about how they might apply in your world. And the first one is this idea of accelerating entry into programs of study. This doesn't mean accelerating DevEd. This means getting people to pick the path they're on earlier. So the task force recommendation that's related to this is the ed planning one, right? One of the other Aspen finalists, Santa Barbara, has this program where they get as early as the 9th grade in the high schools in the Santa Barbara district, they're doing ed plans for the next 10 years. Yes, they're going to change 25 times, but they're getting them to think about it. They spend 4 hours freshman year, 2 hours sophomore year, a couple hours junior year, a couple hours senior year, thinking about their educational plan. Now, of course they're going to change it, but it's already a mindset now. Where am I trying to get to? Right? The idea of thinking about getting students to choose programs of study. There's another college in Texas. They actually took the day before opening day, and rather than doing a day like this, they actually did both. They did a day where faculty came to campus and sat in their offices. Sounds good so far. But what they did with that day is they asked students to go talk to faculty who are in the disciplines you're interested in about what it means to be in that field. What does it mean, I'm not going to use phlebotomy again, to be a dental hygienist? What does it mean to be an accountant? How much math do I really need in the real world to be a biologist, right? Counselors, frankly, they can't answer those questions because they haven't lived in those worlds, right? They can answer a host of other very valuable questions, but that's a really interesting idea about the notion of faculty as advisors and mentors to career pathways and what it's like to be in those fields. It happens in the CTE programs now. But by the way, I taught psychology. I could have told my students a lot about the various paths that are available or not available to you when you have a bachelor's in psychology. Mostly not available. But that's something that I could help them with. So this idea that, and it goes to the second one, ensure students know the requirements to succeed. If you surveyed 100 of your students right now and asked them, what does it take for you to get to either your major or your certificate, the only ones who would have a clear picture of that are the highly contextualized CTE programs who are on a pathway, or the natural sciences, who know it because they've been told, yeah, guess what, you're taking these courses for the next 3 years. You go into the gen ed curriculum where I used to teach, students don't, I guarantee you, most of those students don't know which of the 8 requirements they fulfilled already, right? It's assuming there's 8. And that's something we have to do a better job at managing. We're not saying we can handhold them the whole way, but there's lots of things we could do to accelerate their thinking on that. And so a couple other ones, minimum time required to get college ready. So this is where things, combined with the second one, customizing contextualized instruction, like acceleration. You know, say what you will about the movement of acceleration, but Statway and Quantway from Carnegie, which we also work on, some of the work nationally, CCRC is about to release their first big report on acceleration. They're really promising results. Some interesting questions come up about what students can do after going through that pathway versus another one, but we're starting to see promising results here. Another one by the here on this one that you may have heard about is this study that's both CCRC and on the opposite end of the country, Long Beach, did on the use of transcripts to place students into Dev Ed versus placement tests. Any of you guys see this study? So the net of it is, let's use the Long Beach example. They have 1,600 incoming freshmen a year from the Long Beach Unified High School District, or whatever the high school district is. They were about to change their cut score again to keep more of them out of the transfer level course. So they will only have 100 of the 1,600 students going into transfer level English. Their research office took a look at some transcript data and got information out of CalPass and found that if they used high school transcripts to predict success rates in transfer level English, you find a very fascinating result. Is that students who get an A or B in their senior level English course, and this is not going to be true at all high schools, by the way, I realize there's a high school effect here, are equally likely to succeed in that transfer level course as students who place there. Okay, so that sounds interesting until you do the math on this. What percentage of students in Long Beach High School got an A or B in their senior level English course? It's over 50%. Think about that for a second. So we're going to put 100 of 1,600 into transfer level English, or actually what's closer to 900 out of 1,600 into transfer level English, with the same predicted level of success. Right? Now this is an experiment. They're actually doing this fall. They're actually starting, and they're going to, I can't believe this is actually happening. They got the faculty and the administration to work together to actually do this. And so it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out. Similar results from North Carolina under the same auspices of minimizing time to get college ready. And so one of my things on this is we've spent 40 years, for you guys 94 years, we've spent some amount of time trying to find new ways to keep students out of transfer level courses, right? Here's a chance, right? And I'm not hammering the math or English faculty. It's everyone does this, right? We want students that are more qualified. We think the placement tests are doing that. But here's some data that may 180 degrees turn this on its head and say, these students can succeed there. And they have before. Just think about what would happen if we got 900 students out of 1,600 instead of 100 placing into that transfer level course. So I'm going to wrap up here in a second because I know you guys got to get to the next thing. So the last 4 here, integrating student support with instruction. This one's been around for a while. You know what this usually means? We get student services to do this. Like this often is not about changing instruction and having student services folded in. This is about making sure that student services works with instruction. I'd argue it needs to go both ways. How does instruction really work with student services? Things like learning communities are structural ways of doing that. 6, I've already talked about. 7, reward behaviors that contribute to completion. There are states who are actually getting grant money from foundations to say, you complete the first 45 units with a 3.0, we'll pay for your last 15. Interesting idea. Maybe we can't go quite that far here, but you know what, one thing we could do is that thing I was talking about earlier. Congratulations, you actually got 30 units. You're halfway there. Here's what you need to get there. We have lots of history of research in social psychology talking about the power of that type of incentive in the real world, it's fascinating how much that works, right? So that's something we could do. And the last one is leveraging technology. This is both the idea that I was talking about, that software to do it, but also using things like learner relationship management systems. So the net of all of this is if you did this, and this is what we hope to do with these colleges, the ideal pathway would be one where program learning goals are clearly defined and aligned with a transfer. This one's going to be hard in California. But the second one, we have a well-structured and prescribed pathways with electives as needed to achieve learning goals. This doesn't mean we stop offering all the electives we offer now. We just think about where to offer them and how to layer them into the various pathways. The question might be not how many humanities electives we have, but what is it we want students to know in the humanities as they move down their pathway? It kind of changes the nature of the GE question. We're actually monitoring their progress, and then there are on-ramps to help students choose a program of study and get there faster. I actually don't think this world is that far away. I really do believe fundamentally these colleges that are taking this on can get there, and I do think colleges like the rest of us, the other 1,180, can learn from this. As we think about, if I was to leave you with one thing, it's to think about the student pathway and the student experience and how your policies and procedures interact with that. And for the most part, for most of us, we're very vertical, and that experience is completely horizontal for students. They're on a pathway. Everything we do is lined up vertically. And so part of this is about thinking, how do we actually set ourselves up to accelerate progress from connection to entry to progress to completion for the various groups of our students? And I'd love to talk to you more about it this afternoon. Come with all your questions and complaints. We'll start with this, and we'll move on to some other stuff. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks very much.
I'll take my vodka.
I'm going to have Dr. Chong come up and introduce Terry Schell and then release you quickly to your workshops.
What are you doing? I want to hold on one second. I know you guys are. I want to really again thank Rob Johnstone. Was this helpful? Okay. So this is the launching of a year-long process, and hopefully it'll become part of our environment to really have people like Rob come here to provoke us, to get us to think differently, to also engage in dialogue, because it's going to require all of us to think more horizontally. At this time, I want to invite Terry Schell up to give you some instruction. Terry is going to be the co-chair with me on the Strategic Educational Master Planning process, SEMP. It's SEMP, not HEMP. Okay, so here you go, Terry, and thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Chong. How are you guys doing? We're tired. I haven't seen hands go that fast since my last Eric Clapton concert. How did I get here? That was amazing. It was just absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. Early last semester, I was talking to Dr. Chong, and I was letting him know how lucky he was to be leader of this faculty and staff. True story. I wanted to make sure that he fully understood the collective talent and professionalism he was about to witness and was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. His response was basically a challenge, lucky me. He asked me if I thought the faculty and staff would be up for making an excellent college even better, and that that a vision without a plan really doesn't amount to much. So he asked if we would be up for the first time, for creating a strategic educational master plan built from the ground up, and that he was ready to lend all of his considerable support and experience and skills to facilitate a plan created by us. And you know, we've been underfunded for quite a few years now, and we're repeatedly being asked to do more with less, and it can be overwhelming at times just maintaining the standards we set for ourselves. On top of that, the state and the feds have piled on SLO compliance and student success task force requirements, mandates. So where is the time to be innovative and introspective? The answer is right now. Actually, if one thinks about it, the timing couldn't be much better. We just completed our accreditation midterm report. We're pretty well positioned with our SLOs and coming student success task force mandates. If we couple this timing with the arrival of Dr. Chong, we're in a window of opportunity where we can actually indulge ourselves. I haven't been able to use that verb since, 2002. Actually indulge ourselves to effect real improvements and adapt to our changing needs. Your participation in the next breakout session is absolutely crucial, where we'll learn how a new approach called appreciative inquiry can help us learn about and focus on SRJC at our best, so that we can include and build upon more of the best in our strategic plan. The themes that emerge will help inform and guide strategic planning, the process of strategic planning. So at this point, I wanted to refer to an iconic video clip to convey the potential of your participation in this next breakout. And then I realized most of you are a fraction of my age, so rather than refer to it, I need to show it to you. So, Russ, if we could roll tape. Let's indulge. I'll see you at the breakouts.